Yeah, so actually, now my clicker's not working, of course. There we go. It like my batteries must be dying. Anyway, thank you everyone for coming today. So it's kind of interesting. I usually start all of my presentations with a story, and that story that I tie into the presentation's content. And I couldn't do that for this presentation, so I decided to tell a story that inspired me to tell a story at the front of all my presentations that would also help you with your social engineering engagements. So I choose Bert Kreischer. Did I say that? Anyone? Pronunciation? Anyway, I chose Bert's stand-up comedy that I happened to see randomly on the internet. And Bert does now first of all, the story is really, really funny. Secondly, the way that Bert tells this story is absolutely amazing. And I took a lot of pointers. The first thing I want to point out is that he starts with an outlandish statement. He starts out by saying, hey, when I was in college, I studied Russian and I hung out with the Russian mafia. And you're like, what? And so that's social engineering tip number one for kind of a behind the scenes as to how I do my presentations, is actually I do start out with an outlandish statement that gets everyone's attention and gets everyone engaged with the presenter. And I really believe that's kind of like a social engineering tactic, right? And I thought Bert did that really well. He also does his stand-up without a shirt on, which I'll keep my shirt on, I promise. His stories are awesome. Michael Santarcangelo, who's also the host of Business Security Weekly with me, instilled upon me a lot of knowledge that I've gained and put into this presentation. And Michael points out very nicely 3 quick points to a good story. That's characters, conflict, and resolution. And that's also something that I build into all my stories that I give usually before my presentation. Now, what I really like about Bert's delivery is that he goes on a whole sub-theme, subplot to underscore a point. This may work in some of your social engineering engagements. It may work in some of your other efforts that I'll talk about, such as sales or improving your career, which is the goal of this talk. It goes in this whole thing and says, the Russian mafia guy asked him basically like if he wants to, that wasn't open thankfully, I'm going to put that down here now. The Russian mafia guy asked him if he wants to rob the train. And Bert goes on this story about basically how like he's sitting around on a Saturday morning, his kids are around, his wife and they're still in bed and the kids are around, how wonderful it is, makes a pact with himself that he will never ever cheat on his wife. And you're like, what does that have to do with? And then he says, but I never made a pact with myself that I wouldn't rob a train. But that whole subplot really kind of helps build the story, build the anticipation for the story, making it more believable, because you're kind of thinking like, did this really happen? And I'm pretty sure all the materials I've seen that this actually happened. He describes in detail and creates visual imagery. I can still remember the way that Bert described the Russian mafia. He said, the guy came to the door with his wife beater on, smoking a cigarette, holding a vodka, and track pants. And you're like, yeah, that's like pretty much how I picture someone who's in the Russian mafia. So it's great visual imagery. And so like if Bert entertained me in this way, I'd be like, yeah, sure, like you can come in, like that story was so entertaining. So it has all those elements of a great story, and I think a lot of what we talk about, whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's your career, whether it's a social engineering engagement, you have to be a great storyteller. And that is definitely something that can be learned. And not only can you learn by Bert's story, but you can be entertained by it as well. So I also include that in my presentations normally, except for this one, of course. Sorry. So we're going to talk about some things that I've learned in the past couple of years. About a little over 2 years ago, I left my full-time job at Tenable Network Security, where I actually did spend some time as a product marketing manager as well, to do Security Weekly full-time. And one of the things I had to tackle was sales. And I don't really particularly enjoy doing sales. It's not one of my strong suits. I'd much rather be deploying like a Docker container environment or writing Python code or something like that. But I had to learn it. If I was going to embark on this journey, and it's kind of funny, my wife saw some of the titles of the books that you'll see in this presentation, and she was like, you left your job at Tenable. She was like, I just want to point out that was a really good job that you left. to do this full time. And she's like, I'm looking at these books. She's like, shouldn't you already know that before you decided to leave? I'm like, it'll be fine, sweetie. Totally fine. Totally fine. So we'll talk about how the things I've learned in the past couple of years, you can work to get a job, create your own content, create your own software projects, present at conferences. And then the last three, April, if I get too much into the content in your talk, just like throw one of those balls at me, and I'll stop and I'll change gears. But we're going to talk about how you might ask for training, how you might sell security to management and other teams within your organization, which April has a whole, thank you, April has a whole talk on. Oh, you were just throwing that randomly at me, Chris, is that what you're, okay. And also asking for a raise or promotion, which if you work for Security Weekly, those in the back, you have to leave for that section. So where I'll spend most of my time is talking about some of the tactics and techniques and where I learn them from. And then towards the end, we'll do an exercise and I'll get a little more interaction from you in the audience and we'll do some exercises. But we have to understand the foundation. So the first book, has anyone read this book called The Brain Audit? Aside from people who already work for Security Weekly. Okay, good job, proud of you, did your homework. No, that's awesome. Okay, good. So Sean Zeus is a really awesome person. We actually had him on Business Security Weekly. I got a chance to sit and talk with him. What was amazing is I'm going to talk about another book, and as we're interviewing Sean D'Souza, and I'm like starstruck. I'm like, dude, you helped me with my sales for my business. Like, I feel like I should send you something really expensive as a thank you. And he's like, yeah, you should really check out this other book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I'm like, yeah, I know, we talk about that all the time. So it was really exciting. But the fundamentals of the brain audit are whenever you sell anything, and I learned that this can apply not just like if I'm selling a consumer product, if I'm selling a business-to-business product, or if I'm just trying to sell my story on a social engineering engagement, or I'm trying to sell, it sounds bad to sell myself for my career, these things apply. So he talks about 7 bags. A lot of us probably go to airports pretty frequently. You check in bags, maybe sometimes you check in 7 bags. Let's just pretend you're checking in 7 bags. Are you going to leave the airport without all those 7 bags? Probably not, right? Like you're going to stick around, I mean, unless they really can't find them, but you're going to stick around and figure out what's up and make sure you have all 7 bags. So Sean put together in this book the 7 bags of sales. You don't successfully make a sale or convince someone to purchase anything until they've got all 7 bags. And so those 7 bags are the problem, the solution, the target profile, objections, testimonials, the risk reversal, and the uniqueness. Now, we won't go into necessarily all 7, but there are ones that are certainly more applicable than others. So I really like this book a lot. I'm not a big reader, I more listen to the audiobook. So I did listen to the audiobook. The author reads it. He's got kind of a funny accent, and there's these like jingles in it. If you can get over that, it's a great listen. So he starts with the problem. In a lot of works that we look at in sales, we'll start with the problem. When I first started embarking on sales, and I asked people who are my advisors, and they're like, you have to define the problem. We talk about it on the flip side of the industry. My first question to any security vendor is, what problem do you solve? Now, what most people, kind of an interesting sociology experiment, what most people come back with is what they do. I'm like, no, that's the solution. We'll get there. You have to define the problem. How many people here watch Shark Tank? Right? Awesome, right? Those sales pitches are largely based on a lot of the materials here today. So when you're watching Shark Tank, typically what do they start with? Defining the problem. So, but this is a process that is deeper than I thought, right? I'm like, I can find problems to solve. Like here at Security Weekly, like we solve problems for people, right? And then I started thinking about like, wow, that's a really deep kind of rabbit hole. But for you, if you're embarking on your career and you're going to do something, you're going to write a new software project, you're going to create a new presentation, you're going to go apply for a job, you're going to recommend a security solution, you have to understand the problem that you solve. What problem are you going to solve for people when you create a new blog post? And you may have to brainstorm. And what's interesting, what I've learned about the problem is that other people that you've already solved problems for, so your existing customers, maybe someone who reads your blog, ask them, hey, what problem did that solve for me? And a lot of times, even though you spent so much time like I have, pretty much in that exact kind of robe and pot of coffee, thinking about the problem, when I go ask someone, hey, what problem do I solve for you? What problem does this product solve for you? I get a different answer. I'm like, wow, I was way off. So you definitely have to listen to your customers. Did anyone purchase a product recently that really solved a problem? Anyone? What product did you purchase? This is a dangerous question.
SNMP relay board.
A what?
SNMP relay board.
Oh, okay. And that solved a problem for you specifically?
Yes.
Your SNMP wasn't relaying?
I needed a contact closure in a remote location.
Awesome. That's awesome. Any more exciting things? I mean, that's exciting to you. I get it. It's awesome. So, yes, you bought something, like, I'm talking something like on Amazon, maybe.
I bought a car for my daughter
There you go.
on Craigslist.
Because it solved the problem for her. She needs to get from point A to point B, right?
Exactly. Yeah, she's expecting her first child, so the car she's driving now is just not suitable.
You need a
So-
safe car.
Yeah, so I need.
So the problem is she didn't have a safe
SUV,
car.
Exactly. So yeah.
It's awesome. I bought a toilet seat that has a bidet built into it. I kind of like buy like random things that are advertised to me on Amazon, and I gotta be honest, like most of them don't work out. Like, don't buy the purple pillow. I thought that was gonna solve a problem that every pillow I've ever used in my entire life gives me some kind of like a stiff neck or not a good night's sleep. And this purple pillow, it was awful. It was awful. I think even to the point where we put them in the dog bed and the dogs didn't like them. That's really bad. So they tried to solve a problem. It didn't. But most of the time, when you see marketing from a consumer product company, they're trying to hit on a problem that you have. Okay. The next part is, in your process, once you define the problem, you have to define the solution to the problem. And again, this is where most security vendors, right, will lead in with the solution. Now, some problems are kind of interesting. Like some you have, right? Like you need a car. That's absolutely. Like that's a problem that you know you have. But some problems you may not know you have. And those are much harder for the company to basically socially engineer you into purchasing their product. Because it may be a problem that we don't think exists. And we'll get to some prime examples as well. So some are not really problems that need solving. We see this on Shark Tank all the time, right? Someone's pitching it, and a number of the investors, maybe all of them, are like, like no one needs that problem. So like, no one needs a new sponge for the kitchen, right? Was my initial reaction until you realize that's one of the most successful companies to ever come out of Shark Tank was the smiley little sponge thing. So apparently people have some cleaning issues at home, and it's a bad problem. So, and again, like I said, a lot of times your customer says that they solved a different problem. And we've seen this a lot in the security industry, certainly. We've seen companies pivot, but we've also seen where a security vendor is interviewing their customers, which we'll talk about testimonials. Customers saying, yeah, like I really use your product to do this, and that's how I use it. That may not be the way you intended it to be used. The other important part of the brain audit, I thought, were testimonials. And if you want to read some really funny testimonials, you Google image search for funny Amazon reviews and find gems like that. Yeah, there's a ton of them out there. Other people need to validate your problem and the solution, right? And this is an inevitable part of the sales process or social engineering engagement. I was watching the panel discussion earlier, and they were talking about like they were afraid that someone was going to figure out that they were socially engineering them, right? What you really need is a testimonial to help people overcome their fears. We see this in our business at Security Weekly. We see it with tons of products that you purchase, right? There's probably a list of products in your mind today that you're like, yeah, I'd really like to buy that, but I'm just not sure about the risk. But when you go read an Amazon review or you talk to your friend, they're like, oh no, I bought that, it's awesome. And you're like, you know what, I'm gonna go buy one of those too. That's the power of the testimonial. And a big part of testimonials is getting your existing customers to describe the problem and the solution as it relates to them. And this is very powerful if someone's going to doubt the process. we'll look at applying testimonials to our careers and other things that we're doing in our careers. So that leads very nicely into the risk reversal. And we've all seen this, we probably just haven't labeled it as the risk reversal. And that is, when you buy something, they take away the risk. This is what we typically see in those infomercials as a 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, it goes a little deeper. The author of the book, The Brain Audit, sells a CD or DVD library of his materials, the book, and some additional materials as well. Now, what he says is, I'm going to give you the lawnmower guarantee. It wasn't enough for him to say, hey, if you buy all my CDs and DVDs and you use them for 30 days or 60 days, whatever the guarantee is, and you return them, we'll refund your money. And the fear that his consumers did through getting testimonials and understanding his customers, the fear they had was, well, if one's broken or one's missing or it's cracked or scratched, like, are you still going to give me that guarantee? If you've unboxed it, have you basically voided this guarantee? So Sean changed his business model and basically came up with the lawnmower guarantee. He said, you can buy all my CDs and DVDs, you can take them home, unbox them from the box, throw them on the lawn, run them over with your lawnmower, pick up all the little tiny pieces, put them back in the box, and I'll still refund your money. And you know what? The amount of returns he has is pretty small, because most people like his product. And know that that lawnmower guarantee exists, that if they don't, they can always return it. So his sales were increased. This risk reversal is sometimes pretty easy, like the lawnmower guarantee, that's pretty easy. In other things, it's maybe not so easy to do a risk reversal, and you have to really think about it. Okay, so that was The Brain Audit. Has anyone read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss? A couple people? Awesome book, right? I really feel like once you read this book, like you have Jedi mind trick powers. Like you can really influence people to do what you want. So I thought it was appropriate for our audience today. Chris was at one time the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI, specifically in kidnapping and terrorism cases, where the title of the book is very indicative as to his tactics. You can't really split the difference. You can't, in a hostage negotiation, I mean you could, but you probably don't want to say, hey, yeah, you know what, if you give me 5 hostages, you can just kill those other 5, like it's cool, I'll just take the 5. It's kind of like, well, I really want to pay 50, but you really pay 100, so I'll pay 75, we're going to split the difference. That doesn't work in Chris's world. And there was a lot of unsuccessful hostage negotiations, and Chris and a lot of other really smart people got together to come up and increase their success rate. And really what they found was that there were some techniques that you can pull from this book. And I'm not really going to do it justice. You really have to read the book and then probably read it again to really get them. But labeling is really important. I think it's usually described as kind of a listening skill. Is you take in what the person is saying and you assign a label to it. So, I mean, that can take many different shapes and forms. You could label one of their emotions, such as fear or joy. You can label a certain situation as comfortable or not comfortable. The important point is when you label something, you are showing empathy. And I really think that this book really helped me understand what the word empathy really means. So labeling is part of it. Now, mirroring is also part of labeling, and that's spitting back what the person's saying to you. So that can be if someone's talking to me, and I do this on a lot of our sales calls too, just to make sure that I understand the point and reassure the person that I'm listening and I've understood what they said. So I'll say, so it sounds like you're in this market position or whatever, and I'll mirror back what they said. And they're like, oh yeah. And I think we called this rapport building before. These are some specific strategies that this book talks about in order to do that. Also, understanding that other person's goals and expected outcomes. I really think when I took away from this book that hostage negotiation, a huge part of it was really understanding that person's goals and expected outcomes. And once they knew that, they had a much better time. And that scary part is sometimes they would uncover that that person's goal was really just to kill everyone. Like they had no intention of ever letting the hostages go. What they found was that was a minority. That most of the time the other goals that they had and expected outcomes from taking people hostage was not to harm the hostages. And they were able to increase their success rates when doing negotiation. So some other cool things from the book is the difference between a no-oriented question and a yes-oriented question. And basically what Chris made me realize is a lot of times, like yesing someone to death is a thing. And yes is a much less of a powerful response than a no. So people can say, oh, like we block stuff in this way, and I'm like, yes, 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 right? Like I'm just kind of like yesing them to death. But if you ask the question to solicit a no response, like you wouldn't want to leave your network wide open to the internet. No, I wouldn't want to do that. You have a much more emotional response to that. So that was an interesting tip. Also, that's right is better than you're right. So to elicit a response from someone that says you're right, they're basically, it's kind of the same thing about yesing me to death. They're like, oh yeah, Paul, you're right, like, move on. But if you say that's right, now you've just found common ground with that person. Now, we both believe that whatever the decision is, whatever it is right. So that's a much better response. Also, I think that his question of how am I supposed to do that is absolutely brilliant. And he actually starts the book off and basically shows how effective that is in a negotiation strategy. He spends a lot of the book talking about that as well, which could be a valid strategy. What I really like is, and I think can really apply a lot to careers, and specifically I think we'll talk about this when we're talking about asking for training, are Black Swans. That's the name of Chris's company, and it's called Black Swan. And basically Black Swans are those pieces of information that change everything in a negotiation. And there's almost always some type of black swan in any kind of negotiation. And you use all of these other strategies, right? Eliciting a that's right, no-oriented questions, mirroring and labeling. Largely your goal is to uncover that black swan. And once you know that, either the deal's not going to go through or it is, because that piece of information is critical to that deal. Okay, now another interesting one is called Play Bigger. Anyone read Play Bigger? It's about category creation. It's really for market analysis, right? But I think it really plays into your careers in information security. Because I really think that, so in the book, they describe how you create a new category in a marketplace as a business, right? That's what the book is all about. It's not about branding. There's a million books about branding. They basically say to throw them all away, and what you need to do is create a category. Sounds nice. It's not always easy. It's a lot of work. However, there are some really great success stories. Steve Jobs and Apple, one of, I believe, his greatest accomplishments was he basically created 3 new categories. And if you want to understand how a category is created, think about the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. Those were 3 brand new product categories that they created and became the category king, right? Sure, there were lots of tablets on the market, but Apple had the iPad, and everyone just had to have the iPad. So in the book, they talk about becoming the category king and those things you need to do in order to be the king of your category. And Apple was really amazing. Everyone's like, oh, why do I need an iPad? That's a problem that we all thought we didn't have, but all of a sudden everyone's got an iPad, and Apple is the #1 category king. So that's this book. Especially if you're considering your own business, this book is extremely useful. However, I think it's also useful if you're analyzing the industry today as a security professional, and also applicable for your career. The one that probably many of us have read, raise your hand. I found a lot more social engineers that have read this book, and not some of the other ones. How to Win Friends and Influence People. This is the one that my wife saw and was like, shouldn't you already know how to do that if you're going to do your own business? I think the lesson this taught me was certainly in empathy, but how I structure my messages and communication. Now, there's a lot of things you can pull from this book, but the thing that I really took from this book, and this kind of came from Wikipedia, which I thought were the 3 best points, right? Be genuinely interested in other people. Whether you're going to apply for a job, whether you're socially engineering them on an engagement, or whether you're writing a blog post or giving a presentation, be genuinely interested in what other people want, right? And make sure that you're delivering that. Be a good listener and talk in terms of other people's interests. This book really, for me, changed how I sent out email communications, right? It's not about me, it's about the person that I'm emailing. And even just that small tidbit really helped solicit a response from a lot of those emails. Okay, so now, taking those concepts from those books, right? I love that he has a cigar here too, I think that was pretty funny. So taking all the lessons from those books, let's apply it to getting a job. I really think you need to create your own category. The first step in creating a category, ironically enough, is understanding the problem you solve, and understanding what they call a point of view of that problem. A point of view is the way that you solve that problem uniquely more than anyone else. And when you're embarking on your career, you need to know what problems that company, the reason you're working for a company is because you solve problems for them, right? And if you understand that problem, that's step one. Now, what makes your ideas different from everyone else? What makes your unique point of view different, right? Apple certainly had a problem in mind with the iPad. They had a unique point of view, right? We're going to make it sleek and stylish and sexy and maybe battery level, whatever it is. They had a unique point of view on the problem that they were trying to solve. And there's lots of different examples of this in the industry. In your career, you can do the same thing, right? Make sure you understand what that company does. Make sure you understand what problems they're trying to solve with that position, and position yourself during that interview as having a unique point of view on solving those problems. Maybe you're applying for a Linux administrator position, and you know that your approach to patching 10,000 Linux machines every single day, that your position on that, your point of view on solving that problem is unique. You've got a unique story around that. Highlight that in your interview. If you can differentiate yourself by understanding the problem better than anyone else and having the most unique point of view, when they're going through all those resumes, they're going to remember you above and beyond anyone else. So I thought that was a really cool lesson that we could pull from a book that's really about how to position yourself in the market and translate that into creating your own category in your own career when you're applying a job. All right. Prove you're listening, especially in the interview process, right? So let's go through examples of mirroring and trying to solicit a that's right response. So this is kind of a bad example, but let's just bear with me for a moment, right? So maybe you say, like, a bad example is when someone's describing what they need, you say, so you really need someone to code in Python and use Vim as an editor because those are the best tools. And they say, well, yeah, like, you're right about that, maybe, right? Maybe they agree with you, but it's not a globally accepted standard, even though the guy's better than the editor, but we'll table that discussion for another time. A much better thing is, so it sounds like you need someone with solid coding skills that can solve problems quickly. The response is more likely to be, that's right, that's what I need. So understanding what problems they're trying to solve, what their needs and wants are, and being able to deliver that. Now, that's not going to lie, right? Like on a social engineering engagement, we're going to lie about some of this stuff. Don't lie on your job interview, because that's bad and will likely come to fruition. Okay. So now let's go into creating your own content. In your career, one of the pieces of advice that we almost always get as security professionals is, hey, if you want to break into our field, you should create some content. You should have a blog. You should have a podcast, like the Social Engineering Podcast, right? And other things that put your name out there in the community. When you create that content, you should keep in mind the problem that you're trying to solve. Whenever I've seen a lot of content, I'm like, that is the most brilliant piece of technical content, but I'm like, what problem does it solve? Why do I want to solve that problem? I don't understand. So when you are doing something like anything, a podcast, a blog post, any kind of content that you're trying to push out there, a video, I always ask people when they come on our show to do technical segments, like, start with the problem. What are you trying to solve? And also, why does whoever's consuming that content, why do they care? Like, you could have the most awesomest technical piece of content in the world, but why does your reader want to consume that content? And that's part of social engineering, is getting people who are interested to read your content, right? You want to drive them to your content. And then once you help people solve a problem, that's going to breed trust, right? I guess you could almost be like, we're trying to be helpful, open the door for people, and pretend to fix their computer to earn their trust. When you're putting things out there in the community, you're showcasing your skills, you're putting your knowledge out there, that's building trust with the community. In fact, it just happens to be one of our biggest selling points here at Security Weekly, right? Is that when you come work with us, that, hand in hand with our partners, we're bringing knowledge and information into the security industry. When people learn, not just from myself and the other talented hosts or very talented people that come from our partners, when you learn from us, it develops trust. You're more likely to say, hey, that was really cool. Like, I learned a lot about this particular subject from that person. I want to go check out their company. I want to go check out their product. So a lot of sales is about trust. You need to build that same trust when you're putting out content into the industry as well. Okay, so here's like an example of how I typically see content that I'd really like to change in our industry today, because this is a typical example, right? So this is a fictitious blog, right? I'm a security professional. I'm like, hey, welcome to my blog. I'm a security nerd and I post about security stuff. Well, like, that's great. Like, there's a lot of people out there that have a blog and they want to talk about security stuff. Why should I read your blog? Now, the other thing is when they get into an actual post, like scanning a Docker container, they're just like, okay, here's how you scan a Docker container. First we download this tool, then we run it against the container, and now look at the cool results. Now, obviously that's oversimplified, right? But the focus of content that I see today tends to be around the actual activity, right? The downloading of the tools, the scanning of the container, and getting to the results. Never mind why we want to do this activity, or what do the results actually mean, and what do we do with them. It tends to be focused on just that technical content, and you're missing some huge pieces right there that will compel people to consume your content. I think my battery's died, sorry. So the way that I would structure this better would be, hey, maybe the musings of a security nerd, a guide to help you on your journey in information security. That speaks to a little more about the problem that I have. And yes, I want you to be with me, like hand in hand, well, maybe not hand in hand, because that's kind of creepy, right? But you're with me through my journey in security. And when you describe scanning Docker containers, you should talk about why. Why do you want to scan a Docker container? Well, you want to find vulnerabilities. You want to verify sources from public containers and public repositories, registries, I should say, that may contain backdoors to maintain the integrity and security of your application. Now you just put it in context, because now the person reading is going, oh yeah, like I have an application, I'm using containers. I want to make sure that I have integrity and security as well. And then talk about how to scan it, and talk about what you do with the results. How do you improve your processes? So I thought that was a good example to talk about how content can be displayed in such a way that breeds a lot more trust. Okay. Now, when we talk about presenting, right? I've already shared with you some of my tips for, giving the actual presentation. A lot of what goes into that is also not just the actual presentation, but submitting to the CFP. So I use a lot of the techniques that I've learned over the past couple of years when I submit to a CFP. And a lot of what drove that was I submitted to a CFP and I got rejected. And I was like, wow, okay, well, I was 2 martinis deep when I wrote it first, all things aside. So that was lesson number 1. And lesson number 2, I was like, wow, I really need to compel whoever is reading these CFPs to choose me. And how do I do that? Well, again, we're going to talk about the problem, right? What problem are you going to solve for the attendees? The conference wants attendees to come. They want them to learn something. They want the speakers to help them solve problems. How will you solve that problem for attendees, right? And include that in your talk. Hey, I want to talk about this because I think it's a problem that people have. Here's my unique point of view and how I solve it. Is your talk also aligned with the people who are coming to the conference? The first thing I ask now, if I'm submitting to a conference or someone is soliciting me to speak at your conference, I ask them, who's in attendance? Tell me, who are they? Are they security professionals? Are they social engineers? Are they network security engineers? Who are they? And what messages do they want to hear? Objections are interesting. You're going to have to overcome them. And maybe some of the objections are, well, you haven't given a talk at a conference before. So the objection and the risk that they're perceiving is, maybe you're going to do a bad job because you lack experience. Now, a lot of conferences today will have a track for people who haven't spoken before, but try to understand some of the objections. Maybe ask the conference, hey, so when you rejected talks last year, like, what were the reasons why? Give me the top 3 reasons why talks were rejected. Understand their objections before you even go into it. And then you got to sell it. And I think really, one of the most powerful tools that we learned from the brain audit is the testimonial. Have you given talks at other conferences? Did they rank you at that conference? And did you include that in your talk abstract, right? And I do that as well. If I scored really well at a conference and I want to give that talk somewhere else, I say, well, I've given this talk before, and I scored very well. And that's kind of like an internal kind of testimonial, right? Like, people have watched my talk before I've given the testimonial. So try to include a testimonial when you speak to other conferences about presenting there. Also, the risk reversal. I've had great success with writing it up, and if my slides are already done because I presented that somewhere else, I let them see my slides. I'm like, you can look at my slides and get a feel for what I'm going to talk about. Maybe there's a video of me giving a snippet of the talk. Like, you can go watch it, right? So they get an experience of what it's like maybe to have this talk at their conference to help them overcome the risk. Now, I'm not sure how like a money-back guarantee would kind of work, because like once you've given the talk, it's kind of done. So I'd call that kind of a soft risk reversal, showing them your slides and such. And then showcase your uniqueness, right? Maybe there's some unique qualification that you have that puts you in a position to give this talk. Like, Chris, like, well, I ran the CTF for social engineering, I want to give a panel on it. Chris is the one that did that. So there's certain qualifications that can also speak to uniqueness as well. But also share with them your unique view of that problem. That's really what I think is going to get their attention the best. Okay, let's talk about asking for training now. I hear this a lot from folks that work for organizations. They're like, I really want to do training that you guys talk about on the show. I really want to learn more about this. I want to go to training, but I keep getting told that I don't have any budget. And I really truly believe that when someone says that we don't have the budget, whatever that situation is, that you just haven't described the value to allow them to spend the money. Because it's different if they say, we don't have the revenue in the company or the profit in order to do that, right? They're just saying we don't have the budget. And I really truly believe that you can always find the budget. And that if you come with a good enough idea where you've qualified that value, whether it be training, a security solution, or whatever, they'll go find the budget. And we deal with that in our sales process all the time. They'll be like, oh, well, I got to see what my budget is. I got to do this. I'm like, look, if we think that we're a great fit to work together, I'm going to tell you what the value and the benefit is of working with us. I'm going to put a price tag on that. If that's not something that you want to do, then budget really doesn't play into that. Our sales pitch is, look, come to us. You're going to advertise with us, and you're going to get a return on investment. You're going to make money on investing with us. So budgets to me, I'm like, yeah, that's cute and all, but we're going to help make you money, right? Is our value proposition when you're asking for training. That value you're providing to the organization should justify the amount of money that they're spending, independent of budget, right? Define the problem, right? If you're going to training, you want to learn something, there's a problem that needs to be solved somewhere in the organization. The underlying problem is maybe you don't have the skills that you need to deal with that problem, to deal with that new project or whatever it is, and you have to go acquire them. Now, the risk reversal oftentimes in a training preys on some of the objections. Well, the old adage is, what if we don't, what if we train our employees and they leave? And then someone says, well, what if we don't train our employees and they stay, right? That's the whole thing. So some of the risk reversal is, you can say, well, I'll stay for a year if you send me to this training, to avoid that risk of that they have, that they have, that you might train them and the employees might leave. All right. How do you collect testimonials? Maybe those testimonials are about the training, right? You can talk to other people that have gone to SANS. You can talk to other people that have acquired this training and get them to give you a testimonial. Say, hey, look, we spent the money and here are the benefits that we gathered from that training. Now, black swans I thought were very interesting for this one because I've seen this in training programs as well, right? So you could be asking for training, you're like, I really want to go to this on-site event, I really want to go, we really need this training. And in the background, sometimes with larger companies, they're looking at buying training for the whole company, right? So the black swan you might be caught up in that process, but in the background, there's other people at the company going, yeah, we're buying, I don't know, $200,000 worth of this training that we're going to get from this source, and we're going to make it available to everyone on campus or in the organization. And that could be happening without you knowing about it. And that's a good example of a black swan. You're like, why am I not getting anywhere with my training request? Well, probably could be because they're making a buy for training for the whole company. And that could be on-site training as well. Or they're negotiating it. So they're holding off on your training until that's figured out. I don't know, I kind of struggle with eliciting what I call a positive no, right? Would you prefer that I do no training at all and mess up the entire network? I don't know. I kind of struggled with a good phrase to come up with there. It's probably not. Like, would you prefer that I didn't train and mess things up or something? I mean, it kind of comes off as too threatening, which I think was already established today is not the way to do social engineering. Okay, selling security in your company. I don't know why I chose this image for that. I think a lot of the other images were pretty relevant. This is really the oddball one because I just thought it was the coolest shirt I've ever seen. Anyway, so having empathy and problem solving. So what are the struggles that other groups have in your organization, right? And this is advice that I've given for some time and really help put it in context, is that other groups have problems. They could view you and security in your organization as just another problem, right? Because we're kind of sounding the alarm, going, hey, there's another problem over here that I need you to work on, so here are some more problems, you should work on them. However, what I've realized that internally when people struggle with, Paul, I can't get my sysadmins to patch things, I can't get my developers to write secure code, and don't think you're going to walk away from this talk and magically convince developers how to write secure code. Maybe we can help you with that problem, but the security is often creating problems, right? You need to be the problem solvers. You need to ask people within your organization, how can I make your job easier? What can I do to enable you to do your job better? And I really think that really speaks about empathy. What I realized was kind of missing from that. Jim Ralph from Aetna came on the show and talked about that as a strategy. I was like, wow, I really like that. Now I've understood that it's really about empathy and being the problem solver. And I think if we phrase security as how can I make your job easier, initial talks may not be really security related, but I guarantee you security is going to evolve and stem from you allowing people to do their jobs easier. When we talk about secure coding, it's about fixing bugs, right? A security flaw and a performance impacting bug and a functional bug, at the end of the day, they're bugs that need to be fixed. And so if we can make it easier for them to fix bugs, now we've helped them. Now they might be more likely to adopt some kind of security tool or strategy. So testimonials are great. And I tell people to do this all the time, and I never really thought about how it actually is a testimonial made out of the pages of the brain on it. And I say, look, folks come to me all the time and they're like, we've got 100 different development teams, and they're responsible for thousands and thousands of lines of code each. And we want to implement with them I don't know, static source code analysis, or some kind of RASP technology, or whatever the defensive technology is. And they're like, we're not getting anywhere. They're like, but there's this one group that I think would do it really well. And I'm like, hold on, wait, back up. What did you say about that one group? And they're like, there's that one group that they're like awesome, and they care about security, and we're working with them. And I'm like, well, have them do it, and have them do everything that you're talking about, and implement the process and take the hit. Then use that group as a testimonial. And I'm like, even better, have that group present to all the other 100 groups. And this isn't something new. It's probably something April's talked about, I believe, in your previous talks, maybe. But I put a label on it of a testimonial. And I'm like, well, that's a really powerful thing to help you get security into all of your different teams. And that example just happened to be with your developers. That could be with your sysadmins that want to patch. It's the same story. I've got 5 teams that have sysadmins. I got this one team, they're doing an awesome job. The other 4 are not. Rather than shaming the other 4 and showing your board graphs that shows, all 5 groups and security really low with those other 4 and shaming them into do security, let the other group that's doing it well talk to those other 4 as a testimonial. Okay. Asking for a raise. So I'll end a little early so we can have questions and discussions, because I really want your feedback. I know this picture was really funny. Like, if you're asking your boss for a raise while you're parking, or the dude is parking his boat inside of another boat, which I just thought was really cool as well. It's all about showing value, and it's not about, value is one of those things we get from Play Bigger. Value is one of those things we get from the brain audit. You have to show value. Value is you've solved problems with unique solutions. I really think is part of the value. There's in a job, certainly there's other aspects of value as well. What we take from How to Win Friends and Influence People is it's not about you, right? It's about the company. It's about the value that you bring to the company. It's not about you. It's not about any other external sources as well, about how much people make maybe at another job or another company, or what the industry trend is. To me, asking for a raise is about positioning your value within a company. Well, hold on. Paul just used a marketing term when he talked about asking for a raise in terms of positioning, right? But that's really what it's about. It's about showing your value and how that value relates to the company, not necessarily your manager or you. Make it about them. Solicit, and again, if you're going to ask for a raise, take the time, read Never Split the Difference, right? Unless you work for Security Weekly, because I've read it too. So read Never Split the Difference. It'll help you have those conversations, right? To elicit those no responses, which are more powerful than the yes responses. To elicit those that's right. To use mirroring and labeling in those situations. In fact, in the book, Never Split the Difference, Chris actually retired from the FBI and teaches courses in negotiating. And it's not just he's teaching other hostage negotiators, it's people like you and me who work in a career that maybe need to deal with negotiating a software purchase, negotiate with your manager, and things like that. And he gives examples of that throughout the book, which are just awesome. It has a lot better examples about basically how to ask for a raise and use the tactics and techniques he talks about in the book in your professional career. Okay, now I think the most important part of this presentation, other than the security donut, is the link to all of the books that I mentioned. If you want to go read them, that is the link. So you can take pictures of that slide, write it down, reference it. That's an Amazon wish list I created that will give you access to all of those books, in addition to Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is really a good book about investing in business. I don't think it really related to social engineering, but it's a really good business book that I picked up on that helps you with your business. But the other books are on there: The Brain Audit, Never Split the Difference, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Play Bigger. Again, those stemmed from Michael St. Arcangelo, who read a lot more books, and I was like, Michael, you're going to make me read books. I really hate reading books. And specifically, I really hate reading sales books because they all sound gimmicky and they all sound awful, but the books that I just rattled off are ones that were not for me. And to give my own testimonial about these books to compel you to go read them and integrate them into your daily lives, I was, again, really the one, I don't like reading. I listen to all of my books, and I don't like sales books because I think they're really gimmicky, and I think they taught you how to lie, and I think it was a complete waste of time. I read the books that were on this list, and I was like, wow, they're totally not that. And you can apply these skills not just to your business, but other aspects of your life as well, including my wife, who's like, I'm like, that's like a mirroring technique. She's like, I'm gonna smash a mirror over your head if you use that stuff on me ever again. She kind of picks up on it, but it can be useful for all kinds of relationships, whether that's a new relationship you're trying to form in a social engineering engagement, a relationship you're trying to form with a potential employer, or other relationships in your life. I've really found probably Never Split the Difference to be the most applicable, but the other ones definitely hit on different areas. So hopefully you got value from that. And I can't do these books justice, like you have to go read them. I'm just giving you the highlights from them. Obviously the books themselves go into a lot more detail. So with that, that concludes the talk section, and we can open up for questions. Sorry. Chris.
I'm just threatening to abuse your wife working with empathy. I'm just kidding. I just have a real question. You talked a lot about empathy. How do you suggest teaching it as a principle in business?
It's a good question. I had to really read these books and then practice in order to learn it myself. I mean, that's just, people learn different ways, right? But we would get on sales calls, and I was like, oh, I want to try that tactic that I just learned to build empathy. And I was like, wow, that worked. And sometimes it didn't, right? And we would take notes on what was working and what isn't. It was kind of a blending of all those techniques, but using them in practice, Chris, I think, to answer your question, is hugely helpful. And I just have to say I'm hugely blessed. And my employees we get frustrated sometimes as to how many meetings we actually have. And I always tell them, like, it could be worse. We could have no sales meetings. And then we'd be in really bad shape. So fortunately, we do have a lot of sales meetings where we can practice these techniques, and I'm very blessed to have that, right? I mean, I'm sure you have your own business, right? Sales meetings, as much as they can be a grind, we're thankful we have them, so definitely practice. Or practice on your friends and family. That can be fun too. In a non-harmful, innocuous way. Like, don't be a dick, really. It really comes down, we talk about code of context, that covers a lot right there in that one sentence. So, more questions? Tori. Yeah. How am I supposed to do that, Tori?
Problem.
When you're looking, say if you wanted to present over a talk, you may not necessarily, you may have some technical knowledge, but you may not necessarily understand what problems need to be solved. How do you go about looking for novel ideas or novel problems to be solved? Do you just talk to people around you? How do you go about that?
The best way to learn about problems people have is to first identify the audience that you're going to target with your solution and talk to them. Ask them what problems they have. And that's, some of what we're starting to do, and it's funny, Tori's here, she's our partner success manager. That's part of what Tori does, and she talks to our existing partners and asks them, hey, like, what problems can we solve for you, right? And maybe potential partners, like I always ask when people are doing sales calls, I'm like, what marketing activities are you doing, and like which ones are solving what problems for you to get that feedback? So to answer your question, you have to get that feedback from your target audience to understand their problems, certainly. And when you look at a show like Shark Tank or a lot of those other shows that talk about entrepreneurs, you discover like their processes that are like, oh, I figured out that people had this problem by talking to them. And so that's really how you do that as well.
Thank you.
More questions? About 5 minutes. Yes.
So like, when it comes to like clients or even people that you're interested in getting employed for, and you talk to them regarding, and they're just having a different kind of background. So with that, in that background, they tell me to like, post a video for singing when I'm, developer, for that, like it's, I'm not sure if that's just for you, just for content creation, or is it just for something that is a personal brand?
So they told you you're applying for a job to do software,
Yeah, like Zoom's like a non-profit idea.
and then they wanted you to have a video about singing.
Yeah, it's just a random video to just post it for that. I don't know exactly.
I just think that's kind of weird.
Right?
I mean, you could be an awesome singer and like send me the link and I'll watch it, I promise. But yeah, that's kind of
Maybe
weird.
it's more about personality, right? Like I've been to several development interviews where they'll ask you, if you could have any equal superpower, what would it be, right? Or just a person of personality.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. They're probably just looking to see if you fit with their culture, right? So they're flipping the tables, right? They're trying to social engineer you to divulge information to allow them to make the decision if it's a good fit with their culture. And I get that as an employer, that's an important thing.
Thank you.
Probably the most important.
Or they're starting a band.
What's that?
Or they're starting a band.
Yeah, or they're starting a band, right? I mean, it's a great point. Any other questions? Thank you, everyone.